as you probably know, Hikaru Nakamura is one of the best players of all time, which is kinda to be expected. As a kid, the guy was already just a monster. This game here was played in 2003, which means Hikaru was only around 16, and while 16-year-olds nowadays are addicted to social media, Hikaru was casually sacrificing queens against Soviet grandmasters, as you'll see in just a bit. Now here he had the black pieces. His opponent was Grandmaster Gennady Germanovich Sagalchik, and without further ado, the game started with d4. Hikaru replies with knight f6. We have knight to c3 by Gennady, and now d5, which basically leads us to, a reverse Ruy Lopez. So here he continues with bishop to g5, hitting this knight, and Hikaru simply reinforces this pawn. We have d6. Sagalchik strikes in the center. We have d4, pretty natural move. We have bishop to b4 by Hikaru, just pinning the knight and kind of threatening to take this pawn. Except here, Gennady completely ignores this and plays knight to e2, because the point is, Hikaru, it seems like Hikaru can just take this pawn, right, free of charge. But the thing is, the pawn here is just so weak, the white can just win it whenever he wants. Here he just plays a3, kicks the bishop, and while Hikaru can take it, the knight will just come to c3, attack the pawn again, and it doesn't really matter. So Hikaru decides to save the bishop. We have bishop to e7. Now Gennady takes the knight because he basically wants to retake the pawn, right? And most people wouldn't even think in this position. I'm sure 99% would just grab the bishop with their own bishop. And while this is perfectly fine, here after knight takes pawn, your bishop here is hit again. So perhaps bishop to e7, saving your bishop pair. And now the game continues in a pretty standard fashion. But a very interesting try that Hikaru goes for is taking with the pawn, because now after knight takes pawn, you can actually go c5, and after the knight goes back, which happens in the game, if you take a look, black here has presence in the center. The bishop maybe is coming to this diagonal, and you have an open file here. So this also seems like a very reasonable try. Here Hikaru continues with c6, basically opening this diagonal for the queen to be developed. We have g3 by white, looking to fianchetto his bishop, and Hikaru decides to do the same. We have b6. We have bishop to g2, bishop to b7, pretty standard stuff. Here Sagalchik goes for queen to d3, signaling his clear intentions to maybe castle queenside. And Hikaru just continues normal development, really not rocket science. We just have knight to d7, and here instead of castling first, Sagalchik tries to improve his pieces. He plays this funny knight d1, looking to rotate the knight to a more central square. At least now this pawn maybe can run, who knows, let's see. Here Hikaru continues with queen to c7, also looking to castle queenside. Here we see c4. We have queenside castles by Hikaru, knight e3, and in this position Hikaru could go for something like knight to c5, knight to e5, because this pawn here is pinned, but instead he decides to take his king first. Why not? Just safety first. And here instead of castling first, Sagalchik plays queen to c2, anticipating this kind of annoying knight jumps. And you might wonder, well, why not queen to c3? Well, here you would block this square for the knight. Perhaps the knight wants to go here someday, so just queen to c2. So Hikaru uses this to play bishop to d6, which looks like an harmless move, but in reality he's just preparing f4, which is actually pretty annoying. Hitting this knight, also maybe then c5 will come, and black will just get a lot of activity here. So instead of having to worry about all of this, white simply plays f4 and shuts everything down. Hikaru tries to poke again. He goes h5 to go h4, but Gennady says no, and just plays h4 and shuts everything down here. Hikaru now sees some holes here, so he puts the knight on f6. Perhaps the knight is gonna up in someday, and Sagalchik finally uses this opportunity to castle while he can. Now Hikaru starts smelling blood, so he starts opening the position and creating some tension. He plays c5, strikes at the center. Now the snipers here are looking at each other. So Sagalchik just closes everything down. He has a rook here supporting, so he just goes d5. Now Hikaru, preparing for the menace here in the center of the board, just puts the rook on this open file, the only piece that wasn't really doing anything. And Sagalchik uses this knight that, if you take a look, also is pretty useless, and he proves it to c3. Because the point is, not only he reinforces this pawn here on d5, but also perhaps knight b5 is coming, hitting the queen and the bishop, and Hikaru doesn't really want to lose the bishop, so here he just goes a6. Sagalchik brings the other rook to the same open file, and Hikaru now here plays rook to g8, which looks a bit odd, you know, the rook going back and forward. What is Hikaru cooking here? Well, the point is, this pawn here wasn't really a target before, because the knight here was actually protected it. But the thing is, now Sagalchik doesn't want to undevelop his knight, block this rook, so he thinks that knight to f1 is a pretty sensible move, just really protecting this pawn. What can go wrong? Well, the thing is, when you're playing someone like Hikaru, these things are bound to happen. Here Hikaru just casually gives up the rook, and this is the start of a brilliance. Just hold on for a second. The rook kinda has to be taken. This pawn was incredibly important, and the point is, of course, now this pawn isn't protected, and after bishop takes, this comes with a check, so king is forced to move, and at least you win a pawn and a knight for your rook. But the main point is, Hikaru is basically arguing that look at these pieces here on the king side, like this bishop along with his knight and these pawns just running up the board perhaps can make something happen. So Hikaru is arguing that he just has a load of compensation here. So let's see. Here is also hitting this pawn, but after the rook moves, we have rook to e2. Hikaru doesn't even care about this, because if you take a look, there's also some tension here, and perhaps the bishops are going to get traded. So Hikaru just rejects all of this, and yeah, plays bishop to c8, just defending. Now we have rook to d3, kind of putting some pressure here, even though it's defended right now. But now comes the moment where Hikaru does basically the only mistake in the game. It's a very natural move. Here plays bishop to e5, looking to plug the bishop here on d4. But I'll get to why this move isn't the best in just a second. Perhaps bishop to f4 was slightly better. The point is, now white can exploit black's weaknesses, and they're very subtle, but they exist. Here Sagalchik goes knight to a4, because this actually threatens to win this pawn here, believe it or not. If something like knight g4, which looks pretty logical, overprotecting this bishop, now knight takes on b6 is kind of an annoying punch here. If the queen takes, obviously the rook comes to this file, and yeah, you can say bye bye to your queen. So in the game, after knight to a4, Hikaru simply plugs the king on a7, escapes all the pins, pretty logical. But now the rook comes, and yeah, the pressure is kind of stacking here, and Hikaru would really love to put his rook up to defend his pawn, but the thing is, he can't really do that because now he closes the connection to the bishop, and that's mainly why the bishop would just be better on f4. Anyways, in the game, this still isn't over. Now the knight kind of has to go back, at least protecting this, and Gennady uses this opportunity to play bishop f3 and go after Hikaru's weaknesses. He starts putting the pressure, and okay, maybe he's just gonna beat the prodigy. Who knows? Who knows? But the thing is, the game ended in less than 10 moves from now, believe it or not. Here Hikaru plays rook g8. The engine says it's an inaccuracy, but not really. After thinking for a bit, he realizes it's the best move, because it may seem a bit weird. What happens if white just takes this pawn? You have this, you will be left with an isolated pawn here. Perhaps you can make something happen. So Gennady fell for the bait. He took this pawn here on h5, but the point is, now the bishop is kind of offset and no longer helps in defending the center. So after pawn takes here, white retakes, and now these pawns are free to run. So after b5, if you take a look, the knight is really forced back. We have knight to c3, but now c4, and just look at this sad rook here. He basically only has rook b4, unless he has rook b5, which happens in the game, and this was Sagalchik's plan. He wanted to take this pawn here because now it's another team. If you take this pawn, well, knight simply retakes, and yeah, you can say bye-bye to your queen again. So in the game, after rook takes pawn, Hikaru had seen all of this, and here he's basically winning by force. So if you want, you can I guess you can pause the video and try to find this forced win for Hikaru, because, well, if you manage to see it from here, you're honestly pretty good at chess. So yeah, just pause the video while I put pressure on you. But okay, in this position, actually the most natural move is the right one. You just have to take the knight with your bishop, because, okay, it makes sense. If the bishop is retaken, you just win the rook and you have a pretty comfortable game. But the main point is that you want to see white's tricks as well. Here you can go d6, and this is indeed a very tricky move, because it not only attacks your queen, but it also opens an escape square for the rook. So after queen takes pawn, rook takes pawn, if you play a move like, you know, just tucking your bishop back, as you can see, white has very active rooks, and your king is basically dead. So this will be a very complicated game. Instead, you have to find something more, and if you haven't, this position was reached in the game, so again, you can pause and try to figure it out. But in this position, yeah, black can just finish the game in 2 moves. And 16-year-old Hikaru obviously finds it. He starts by giving a check. Okay, if you take a look, no pieces can block unless you want to give up the queen, but that is just signaling a surrender, so no point in doing that. Instead, king to a2 is played. Pretty logical. I mean, the king is pretty safe here, right? Unless queen takes pawn is a move. And this is actually brilliant, but yeah, if you take a look, now the game is completely over, because yeah, no matter which way the queen is taken, the white king is just in trouble. If pawn takes, well, just rook here is checkmate, and if king takes, all the same, rook h8 is checkmate, because of this wall here, basically. So it's incredible, but probably this unreal queen sacrifice by 16-year-old Hikaru was probably seen like back here when he played rook e8. This is honestly unreal. I can't even fathom to believe how these guys have so much creativity. I don't understand what do they feed these kids. I honestly hope you guys enjoyed another ridiculous game by young Hikaru Nakamura, and yeah, catch you in the next one.